the alternative, the didactic way of teaching and understanding of the sound system of the language, was diminished in America. It eventually got pushed out of almost all of the colleges of education in America. So you might think that is an extreme statement. I'll cite a little example from Ohio. We happen to be particularly backward in this area in Ohio because one of the top academic scholars in the field of reading, who was a very avid supporter of the whole language ideas, she was the top dog at Ohio State University, and they prepared almost all the school people and the administrators and everything. So anyway, in our state, we have 58 colleges of education. And in the process of advocating at the legislature to make sure that we were training teachers to be constructivists for the kids who will learn well that way, who will be really set on fire by great constructivist reading instruction, but who also have the skills to employ the didactic instruction that the non-intuitive kids needed. We ran into a situation where we found out that the colleges of education in the state of Ohio actually did none of that second piece. There was an organization in Ohio called the Ohio Board of Regents, mandated by the state to supervise the behavior and the activities of all of the accredited colleges in the state. So any college in Ohio that wants to issue a degree has to submit a 50-page dossier to the Board of Regents that lists every important thing they will teach to a person who is going to qualify for this major. And the Board of Regents reads all that stuff and says, no, you left this and this and this out, so you're not going to be accredited for a mechanical engineering degree because you didn't teach calculus, let's say. We went and talked to the chancellor of the Board of Regents, and we explained our worry that we weren't going to be able to get the kind of instruction that all kids need in the schools if we were only teaching teachers in the colleges of education to do one kind. So he was pretty dubious about whether that could possibly be true. It seemed too bizarre that it could be true. So he actually, though, he gave us permission to put together a committee of educational people who know a lot about this stuff. And so we were given the job to review that 50-page document from every college of education in the state of Ohio to see if, in fact, our young teachers would be trained to recognize the kids who could profit from one kind of instruction and do that, and then also recognize the kids who would profit from quite different and be able to do that. So this is the part that's going to sound like I'm making this up. There was not one single requirement in the curriculum of all 58 colleges of education what was focused on teaching teachers how to teach the phonetic structure of the language to children. Anybody disagree with that? I'm making it up? I'm not really. The Board of Regents eventually decided they wanted people to come in and rewrite those standards for every college and then go back to the college and say, these are new standards and you will have to meet these to be accredited next time around. So we're still in process. We don't know if that's going to work or not. But the point is, the enthusiastic adoption of constructivist instructional models wasn't just about this school and this teacher. It was about many schools, all schools. But it was also about the people who teach teachers. So I looked it up. Pennsylvania has 5 colleges who have received, not state, but outside accreditation for teaching their teacher candidates the kind of information they need to know to provide effective teaching based on the structure of the language, on the phonetics and on the how to sound words out. And I'm sure you have others that didn't appear in this list, but what it really says, to the degree that list is accurate, you're in about the same shape we're in Ohio now. We now have 5. And many others are working. The biggest problem they have now is not that they don't want to. Most of them have sort of bought the argument that I'm making here. It's that they can't find highly qualified trainers because their professors, when they were young and going through their undergraduate and their master's degree, they weren't taught this stuff either. All right, so overall, what's the result? You know, it can be, constructivist learning can be a wonderful improvement when it's applied to students in appropriate subject areas where constructivist learning really works, and when it's made available to students who benefit from the program, that kind of thing. But it's horrible when that's what the child needs, but it's not what we have available. All right, so in the 50s, we had what we started what were called were the reading wars, and there were people on both sides of this argument going back and forth in the schools. And in 55, Rudolph Flesch wrote the famous book, Why Johnny Can't Read, and he was a professor at Columbia, and a neighbor actually brought him their son, a 14-year-old child, and said, I know you're a professor at Columbia. I have this kid, and he's a very smart kid, but he can't learn to read. And the guy started, just as a favor to a neighbor, working with this kid, and he found out the kid had never been taught anything about how to sound a word out. And so he was so perturbed about that that he sort of got interested in this whole field. And he found out that it was not where he was living, it was not a common thing, that children did not get taught that. So he wrote this book about why American children, many of them weren't learning to read, and it was because the structure of the language was not being taught didactically. And that was followed up by Professor Gene Shaw, who wrote the first study in America that looked at the different ways. How much evidence was there from science about this one way of teaching reading, and how much evidence was there about this other way of teaching reading, and put them together and said, so what's your conclusion? And so this was the first major study, published study in America, where the conclusion was that the structured language, the language that sort of didactically teaches how to know the way the language works and how to sound it out, long term, that was better. And then, not long after that, Professor Ken Goodman at Arizona published his most famous book, What's Whole in Whole Language? And he makes a stirring defense of it. It's available online. If you look up Goodman and that title, What's Whole in Whole Language? It is a brilliant argument in favor of why it's a lovely way to teach. So, I mean, it's worth looking at. Mentioned the professoriate in the schools where they didn't have it either. So anyway, what has happened largely is that there has been over time a large-scale abandonment of decoding as the core thing that needs to be taught in reading. So, we're at a place now where I have worked with quite a few districts that are wrestling with this. They have historically loved their constructivist learning. They hired brilliant teachers who were marvelous at it. And the work that they do with kids in content area courses where constructivist learning is a huge plus is brilliant. They're doing dazzling work with those kids. But mostly, that's the whole faculty. And so when the non-intuitive kids come along, they don't have to go. Lots of districts are starting to come to terms with this and say, well, what can we do? So in the meantime, there have been publishers who have come out and said, they used to be people who published almost completely the whole language kind of approach, the constructive approach. And now they're publishing balanced approaches or LLI or a variety of other commercial products which try to straddle the fence. So in the course of thinking about this as a district, as parents, as school administrators, here is an idea that can help the discussion go forward, and that can help schools ensure that what they've got available in their classroom is going to work for both the intuitive and the non-intuitive learners. And whoops. All right, so what are the schools dealing with? Well, in my state, they got something called the third grade reading guarantee. The legislature passed a law that says if you don't pass this reading test in third grade, you have to get retained in grade for the following year. You can't move on to fourth grade. That's sort of one. Then we have the No Child Left Behind, the federal legislation, which was sort of punitive if you don't do this or that or the other. There was a lot of consequences in there for you. So the districts are under a lot of political pressure on this. And then there's a lot of legal pressure. I've worked with a number of school districts that one of the sort of hidden costs of not having skillfully delivered services available to both sides of this means that there's a lot of conversations that actually don't produce good results, and then people get mad And what happens is, when the parents get mad enough, they sue the school. So there's a lot of legal activity, and on the special ed side, there's a lot of hearings, and both of those are costly and very time intensive, and they tend not to raise the level of friendliness within the district among various components in the district. So what might be useful for districts that are under pressure from the state government, for instance, to show X amount of reading growth, X amount of growth per student in the state? And in states that do this kind of stuff, the pressure is heavy. And locally it's heavy. If you're a district that historically has done well, you're very concerned about making sure that your scores don't go down, that you are showing up at the top of the heap so that everybody recognizes that you're a great school. Those kinds of mandates from the state almost force school leaders to look at the data on all of their kids lumped together. Problem is, when kids have trouble learning, whether it's reading or not, that's not a whole group activity. That's a one kid activity. And so when the school is being leaned on to look at all of the total group stuff, and those are the scores that they're focused on, annual growth sounds like a fantastic thing. If your superintendent can come back to your district and go to your newspaper and say, we had the highest annual growth of any district in Pennsylvania, everybody will clap and cheer. So here's a question about that. What if that's what you had in terms of your growth? But what if a bunch of the kids who made that statistic work, they gained a year of skill in the previous school year? What if they started out 2 years behind? What's that kid's long-term prospect? If he gains a year of growth this year, and gains a year of growth next year, and gains a year of growth next year, well, his district's scores are going to look great, right? Because everybody's getting a year of annual growth, aren't they? Well, what's happening to that kid? Something's not happening. What isn't happening for him? That's exactly. However far he was behind, he's still that far behind now. So this concept is one that parents and schools can use, just as we use the ideas about intuitive and non-intuitive learners to change how we thought about a hard problem and how to guide our thinking to a more productive approach. This idea that you should be measuring internally, whether you're measuring it externally or not to the state, if you're measuring internally, this concept. Annual growth for all students, but also catch-up growth for those who are behind. So if a kid is 5 years behind and he's making 1.3 years of growth, he's making more than annual growth. But how old will he be when he finally catches up and he keeps doing it? If it's a third of a year of extra growth every year, it's going to take 3 years to catch up 1 year that you're behind, and then 3 more. So this idea of annual growth for all and catch-up growth for those who are behind can be a wonderful thought tool for teachers and administrators and for parents. When you want to see data on your kids, you want to see not if my kid has a reading, but I don't just want to see did he make annual growth. I mean, is there a prospect before he dies that he will actually catch up at this rate? If there's not, then this needs to be rethought, okay? I want to recommend a book to you for those people who think this is a great idea. There's a man named Lynn Fielding. Lynn was a 10-year board member of a public school district in Kennewick, Washington. It was a small agricultural city in eastern Washington. It had the kind of student population that people widely acknowledge as being relatively hard to teach. Over 50% of their children in their district were minority. Over 50% of the children in the district were on free or supported lunch fees, which means that these were poor kids, and of course poor kids have a harder time with this than wealthy kids do. Lynn was a professional bean counter in his real life. He was a CPA kind of guy. And after he'd been on the board for a while, he started to notice that every year when they did their annual assessment of how things were going in terms of their kids' learning, that about half of the kids were not at the benchmark for their grade level. So he was disturbed about that, and he talked to the rest of the board, and they said, well, you know, it's been that way forever. You know, we've got this tough district, and they're really hard to teach, and, you know, we've done all this stuff, and, you know, year after year it just stays that way. He said, well, is that the way we want it to stay? And they was, oh, no. I said, well, what shall we do about it? Oh, well, we've thought about that. We haven't been able to figure out what to do. He said, and Lynn said, I think, as a Board of Education of Kennewick, Washington, we need to think about that and figure out a plan. And they did. And as a district, the schools, the principals, the teachers, and the board came together around this idea that they were going to give themselves a number of years to do it. But they weren't going to stop until 90% of their fourth graders read at grade level. Took them a long time. 7 years, they did it. It's the only school district I know in America with this kind of demographic that actually addressed the issue of how to teach reading for the kids who struggle with reading in such a way that they brought 90, and actually, he's a B count, so he goes for the decimal, but it was 89.7% of the kids. So, but he called it 90, okay, and I'll go with him on that. So Lynn wrote a book, and the title of this book is Annual Growth for All and Catch-Up Growth for Those Behind. I ran across it at a International Dyslexia Association conference. They always have a center where they have, you know, interesting books. And I saw that title on the back of that book. And I said, I don't know who this guy is, but I know one thing for sure. With a title like that, he is not a marketing guy. So maybe he's an educational guy. I'm going to look at this. I read the book, and then I met Lynn, and then helped connect Lynn with a number of schools and districts and states, although he's good at doing that himself. The book is available. You can find it on, oh, you have it right there. Okay. You can find it on Amazon. It's out of print now, so it costs a little more, but it's a heck of a read. It is a sort of week-by-week, month-by-month story of what they did to get from where they were to where they wanted to go. And it wasn't all easy. And at first, for the first 3 years, they basically made mistakes. So initially, they said, well, our instructional curriculum and our instructional methods are great, so we can stick with those. Well, all we have to do is try harder. So they kept the same curriculum, and they just did that curriculum harder. Well, how do you do that harder? Well, you get everybody in the building, all the secretaries, everybody else, the janitors, everybody was reading to kids every day. And at the end of the first year, there was not any visible progress. They said, well, we haven't been reading to all the kids enough every day. And so next year, they redoubled their efforts. And they read to kids absolutely as much as you can read to kids in a school and still keep the school going. And there was no way to do it more. And so, well, that variable is out of the game. That's not right. Then they examined the variable. Well, what about our curriculum and what about our teaching methods? They didn't have a curriculum that was attentive to the kids who needed didactic learning. Nor did they understand the processes that underlie didactic learning. They had to be trained in that. Then they came to the hard decision. We have to think about this curriculum and how we're doing it. And in the third year, they made the switch. And because it was brand new, they picked a pretty good curriculum. Addressed more of what was needed. But it was hard to make the switch. And in the third year, they saw a little progress, but not a lot. In the fourth year, a third of the kids who conventionally always failed finally made the criterion, but 2/3 didn't. So they'd gotten a third of the way there. They said, well, we did this, we worked on this as hard as we can work on it. We've got this curriculum we think is the best we can possibly have, and we still only got a third of them there. What's the variable we aren't looking at? Guess what it was? Time. It turns out that the first third of the kids were non-intuitive, but they were the least non-intuitive. And so this much instruction that worked for non-intuitive kids moved this third of kids across the line. So here is one of the things that the research has told us, the NICHD research, we'll look at in detail shortly. Different kids have different rates of remediation from their deficits. Kids can be relatively easy to remediate back to grade level, moderately hard to remediate back to grade level, or hard as heck to remediate back to grade level. And the function for those kids is time. One of the things we learned when we looked at the non-intuitive learners, the non-intuitive learners get it more slowly than the intuitive learners do. It takes more time. And then always had that forgetting thing going on with the two guys, so you make some progress and you slide back. So the second year, they changed, in their whole district, they changed how they allocated time. And the kids in that cohort who didn't get far enough, they got 2 hours of it a day. And at the end of that year, guess what? Another third of them made it. Now they had 67% of their students there. So what conundrum does this present to you if you're the people running that district? What are you going to do next year? You've already cut another hour out of the regular day, right? Now you got all these kids in this for 2 hours. What are you going to do? No guessers here? Yeah, that's what they said. We've got to do 3 hours. Well, so all the science teachers got mad. You're taking science out of the curriculum, so I do this, you know. You can't slight science. Science is very important. We can only save the world through science. All these good arguments. You're diminishing the amount of math you're getting. You're diminishing the art you're getting. You're diminishing the PE. If people aren't physically healthy, what the heck does it matter if they can't read, you know. Every argument you can think of, and they stuck to the guns and said, we all as a district, parents, board, school district employees, we all agreed we're going for 90%. And when they went to the 3 hours a day for the kids who were the hardest to remediate, guess what? Heck of a story, isn't it? What a commitment by those people. So if you want to see how they did it, there's the book. It is almost like a diary of how it works. But there's many lessons in there for us to think about in our own schools, in our own districts, about how we wrestle with what our kids need. How are we all going to get 90% of our kids? That's right. Because they got to be here. All right, so here's the things that districts are wrestling with around these ideas. One of the issues, the third one down there, is that administrative leaders and many of the faculty aren't trained in this stuff. And so to hand them the ball and say, okay, you guys figure it out and go ahead, that's a hard thing. Where are you going to get the information that you need to make wise decisions? Limited availability of effective instructors, people who have been carefully trained in this. Now I know a lot of school districts now are going outside of their district to find people who have a legitimate track record at being really good at this stuff and also being really good at training other teachers how to do it. So that's an important component too, is where you go get the knowledge to arm your teachers with what they need to provide the instruction that's going to work for those children. Districts face financial pressure. Where do you get the money to do this, for heaven's sakes? You know, they already spend all their money getting the results that they're getting now. Where does the money come from for the additional training, the supervision, the guidance, the new materials? That's not an easy thing either. So all of those things are things that should make parents be understanding and sympathetic for the challenges that districts face in wrestling with this problem. It doesn't mean you stop paying attention, but I mean, you can't just get upset about it. So I'm working with a district in Columbus right now who was, for a long time, was famous for being one of the most high-performing districts and for being regarded as one of the best schools. And they decided to make a major time and financial commitment to bringing in trainers who could arm them inside their school district with people who knew this stuff and knew how to implement it and knew how to train and coach teachers to do it. So I went to a meeting with board members were there and the school district leaders were there, and there were about 45 parents who were there. And the parents, which is a phenomenon that has occurred rapidly now since we've had the internet where people can communicate and get information, it's pretty common for districts to have a very knowledgeable and well-educated group of parents around all this stuff. They help each other out, they go to conferences, they study, and they really know this stuff. So these parents were there because the district was saying, we are now implementing a program designed to address the needs of the children who weren't being well served by what we were doing in the past. And so they came in and they explained all of it, put everything up. It was a very impressive package of what they've committed to do and what they're doing and how they're bringing people in training and everything. I said, but my kid is still not getting that. It's still not happening for her. And partway through the meeting, there were tears, there were loud voices, there was anger, and it was about people afraid for what their kid's fate was going to be. Because even though the district had sort of made a turn in how it's going about its business, you couldn't deliver it. You don't just decide, write it on paper, and then have what you need to deliver the instruction. So you couldn't do it that way. And they were saying, give us credit. Look what we're doing the right stuff. And they were saying, give us credit. It's our kid. She's going to get ground to pieces by this. She needs this now. What are we going to do? So I was well known in the community as the head of Marburn Academy for a long time, because we were the only school like us in our region, and people knew that we worked with these kids and we knew how to work with them. And in years past, when Dublin was very resistant to these ideas, I had tried to work with them, and they said, get lost and not interested. So I sort of privately saw them as people who weren't willing to accept this challenge and do this. They were going to stick to their guns and do what they do. And I sort of lost faith that might happen. And then to be in that meeting and watch those folks talk straightforwardly and honestly and truthfully about the incredible changes they were making to make their program responsive to the needs of the children, of the mothers who were crying and the fathers who were yelling, I had to stand up and say, can I say something here? And they all asked from us. So the school people were kind of like, well, I don't know. But they let me make a little talk, and I said, I got to tell you moms and your dads that you're upset and you're justified enough that nobody should sit back and just relax and say, oh, it's okay that my kid isn't learning to read. On the other hand, I said, you guys got to give this district credit. I never thought I would see this happen here, and these people are revolutionizing your district and doing the right stuff. It didn't make them stop crying, but at least I felt like I gave the district credit for what they were trying to do. And that is really important. So when a district is trying to do this stuff, there's got to be, I think it's important for parents to be knowledgeable and to bring new information and to argue and negotiate and collaborate with the district to keep it moving. But I also think there's got to be mutual support. So it has to be that way. If the school district officials or if the parents allow it to descend into nothing but tears and yelling, it's probably not going to happen. So I have some advice here for people who are working as change advocates. Cultivate, recognize, support, and credit willing district allies, despite the fact that the pace of change might be a little slow. It just takes a long time, When I got to Marburn, we had 72 kids, I told you this. They didn't know how to read. We had 14 teachers who didn't know how to teach them. I knew what the right stuff was. But it took me 5 years to get my teachers trained well enough that I could say we do a really good job at it. It isn't just being determined to do it. Help districts select key goals that will measure improvement for individual students and make that data available district-wide and for families so that catch-up growth can become an important part of the way that both parties to the dialogue are thinking about what do we need to do to get catch-up growth. Parents often become trusted sources of very good information about what can help move the ball down the field by becoming well acquainted with the science. So that's a really important thing that can happen. And there are schools around the country that are struggling with exactly the same issues. You can become, as parents, you can become people who bring those case studies and those models to your teachers and your supervisors and your board members and your district leaders so they can see how other schools did it and use that as kind of a model. And then there are many of them that are much lower level than what Lynn Fielding did in his book. But that's another possible thing that parents